We are pleased to welcome Noah Hertz. He is the dedicated St. Johns County beat reporter for Jacksonville Today. Noah, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Ann. Good morning.
It's good to have you. And of course, we've had you on the program several times, but I don't think we've discussed necessarily just the scope of your work and why Jacksonville Today decided to hire a reporter just to focus exclusively on St. Johns County.
I think it's been a little bit. Yeah. I think it's an interesting thing because, I was just talking to somebody in St. John's a few days ago about how they were saying they really like the newsletter. They really like that Jacksonville Today does do so much kind of focusing on St. Johns County specifically. But they were saying, I wonder how people in Jacksonville feel about it. And I was like, no, people in Jacksonville seem to like know what's going on in St. John's too, in the same way that folks in St. John's like to know what's going on in Jacks because, we all live so close to each other. Everybody drives to and from somewhere on the weekends. So it's just been a really neat opportunity for us to kind of expand our scope in terms of what we're really paying attention to in this area.
And so much of what's at issue in St. Johns County has a lot of overlap, and the issues that we're going to be discussing today certainly do. We are also taking calls and questions. If you have questions for Noah Hertz about what's happening in St. Johns County, if you have stories to pitch to Noah, we are taking your calls and comments and questions. You can reach us at 904-549-2937. You can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. So I do want to start with something that has, resonance here, certainly, because the millage rate is all important in all kinds of counties in Florida right now. Everybody's considering whether to maintain or roll back the property tax rate. And that's something that St. Johns County is going to be talking about this week. But public safety is really at the core of what you've been covering recently as it relates to millage. So what's going on with the firefighters in St. Johns County right now?
Yeah, I will say this kind of kicked off initially from some reporting that the folks at News4Jax did about how the St. Johns County Fire Union is currently, they're in negotiations back and forth with the county about their contract that'll be part of this budget. And one of the things that they were negotiating was lowering the number of hours that individual firefighters are working in St. John's. So right now the state has put out a recommendation that firefighters only work 42 hours weekly, whereas in St. John's, I believe it's more than 50 right now that each firefighter works. So the union was going back and forth with the county, or is still going back and forth with the county. And so I reached out to them after News4Jax's reporting because I wanted to talk a little bit about the budgetary aspect of that. And it's like you said, everybody's talking right now about, are we going to raise property taxes? Are we going to lower property taxes? And a lot of elected officials are saying, we would like to roll back property taxes. We would like to make it so that you as a taxpayer, as a homeowner, as a property owner, do not have to pay any more in property taxes. But in this case, the fire union in St. John's is saying that, with St. John's plans to build, 4 new fire stations in the next 5-6 years, the union president is warning that if they do go to a rolled back millage rate, if they do truly not put as much money as the union is hoping they do into the fire budget, they might not be able to pay for staffing for all the people who are going to be a part of these new fire stations. So I had a conversation on Friday or last week with the county administrator, and one thing she told me is that when they're recommending the budget to the county tomorrow to set the tentative millage rate, that they are not going to recommend a rollback on the fire budget, that they're going to recommend that they increase that funding.
I thought it was interesting that the county administrator, Joy Andrews, that you spoke to, seemed to be very strong on that. She basically told you, we will have to recommend a millage increase for the fire district. And that doesn't even include the work week changes that you're saying, in terms of having firefighters work fewer hours. I presume if you have firefighters working fewer hours, that means you ultimately have to have some more firefighters that you hire. And she basically said that, we're going to have a 0.87 millage increase. So even before it goes before the county commission, the body that she advises, she's sort of saying this is what's going to happen.
Yeah. And it'll still be a really interesting conversation when it goes to the county commission because, you've got people in the county commission who have already kind of signaled, County Chair Krista Joseph specifically has already said that she is very eager to at least try to get the budget to a rolled back rate. And the immediate question that, people ask after that is, what are we going to cut then? And it's a lot harder then to point at services or things that the county provides and say, in order to get the budget back to this level, this is what we are going to stop funding, or this is what we are going to fund less. So yeah, I thought it was really interesting that Joy really drew a line in the sand there and said we need to fund the fire district. Now, whether the county commission agrees with her, remains to be seen. But that's where the county administrator's head is at.
She indicated as well, Joy Andrews, that they did do a rollback in 2021. It was the most recent time, and that the county's still kind of paying for that in a
Mhm.
way, is not able to perhaps fund things to the level that they'd like because that has set them back.
Yeah, this was something that, I hadn't even really thought about until the two of us were talking. But since the property tax rate is set relative to the previous year, when you set it at a lower level one year, in subsequent years, getting it back up to, say, a level that it would have been at had you not lowered property taxes requires an increase. So, and nobody wants to increase taxes. Pretty much across the board in the state of Florida. Nobody wants to be the politician that raises taxes, no matter how necessary you might argue it is. And so, yeah, that was something she told me, is that it's a frequent topic of conversation in St. John's about infrastructure issues and things like that. They tried to institute either a half cent or a cent sales tax on for road improvements just in the last couple of years relatively, and that did not pass. And so there are very frequently conversations about, the infrastructure really needs work in St. Johns County. How are we going to pay for those infrastructure improvements?
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Noah Hertz. He's the St. Johns County beat reporter for Jacksonville Today, and you're welcome to join our conversation. We're talking all things St. Johns County. We can be reached at 904-549-2937, or we can be emailed, if you'll have it that way, at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. And you can reach out on Instagram, Facebook, or X at FCC On Air. Noah, I want to ask you, because one of the things that firefighters have noted is an increased workload. The county is, as we said, the fastest growing county in Florida, sometimes maybe the fastest coastal county. I know Polk is sometimes catching up close, but in terms of like a larger county, St. Johns County is certainly the fastest growing. And there's also been sort of a change in the kinds of fires that firefighters are responding to, which I thought was really interesting. You talked about Nocatee, for instance, which is a kind of planned community where people are driving a lot of electric vehicles, whether it's little golf carts or bicycles, and that's created a fire hazard.
Yeah, it was really fascinating hearing that from the folks at the fire union, that they're responding to more battery fires these days. Not more so than anything else, and not maybe to an insane degree, but it is certainly more than they have ever responded to, because there are just more people with big vehicles that have big batteries in them. So I know we've definitely heard stories of, there will be a house fire and then it will end up being a golf cart that had been plugged in for too long and overcharged or something like that, and then the fire department will issue a reminder that you not overcharge these things or not leave them unplugged when you're not watching them. But yeah, I thought that was fascinating. It was just something I hadn't thought about. Another thing they mentioned to me is that, when there are areas that have been clear cut of trees and there are fewer trees for lightning to strike, they respond to more lightning strike responses. And that was another one just I had never considered, that is like a really tangible difference compared to how an area might have been before a big development moved in. Or
Yeah,
something
it's
like
a
that.
fascinating impact of growth that I don't think
Yeah.
I would have thought of either. And I guess when it comes to millage rates and taxes, I mean, obviously the income that's coming into the county is growing.
Yeah.
It's a fast growing county. Why is it that those additional funds don't suffice to meet the needs of, say, first responders and how they're having to respond to this growth? It just
Yeah.
isn't sufficient, they say.
That's a $1 million question that I don't think I can fully answer, but I know I can definitely say that in part it's because the growth has been so rapid. It would be one thing if it had been more of a steady growth over time, but we're talking in the last 5-10 years, truly just explosive growth in St. John's. And so because of that, when 10 years ago the county was not anticipating that they were going to grow at this rapid of a rate, there was no way of knowing that, oh, well, if we're a little behind on this road improvement, nothing too crazy is going to happen, and then your population explodes, and suddenly the effects of that are really amplified.
We've got a call from Mark in St. Augustine. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Good morning. I love St. Augustine. I moved here about 5 years ago from Jacksonville. I'm a big booster of St. Augustine. And to that end, I would like to ask everybody in Jacksonville and pretty much everywhere to just stay out of St. Augustine and let us be. However, I want to know who. I keep my ear to local politics, and I don't know of any groundswell about cutting the millage rate. As a matter of fact, it's kind of funny. I have, of course, a whole bunch of Yankee friends from New Jersey, and they can't believe they're paying tens of thousands of dollars property taxes every year compared to, I think my girlfriend paid $1,100 on her house. So, especially when it concerns public safety, who is, is this just politicians wanting to look good saying, hey, we gave you guys a couple of bucks back every year? I don't see the groundswell for it.
Thanks, Mark. It's interesting, Noah. There has been obviously talk, at least here in Jacksonville, of the need to offset things like rising insurance rates, rising home prices, and giving, taxpayers a break. But it doesn't necessarily amount to much when you're talking about rolling back millage. You're talking, tens of cents.
And I can say, to Mark's point, the city of St. Augustine is not a part of any of these discussions. The city of St. Augustine for the last decade has set the same tax rate every year, which amounts to a small increase in property tax. Since property values increase when they set the same rate, that means that you pay slightly more on your property taxes. That push to reduce property taxes is really coming from the county level. Like I said, Chair Krista Joseph of the County Commission has said multiple times during meetings that she wants to see something like the federal government's Department of Government Efficiency. She has said repeatedly that she wants to see at least an option for a rollback. And same with the chair of the local Republican Party, Denver Cook, has come up a couple times during public meetings in the public comment period and said, look, if you guys do not support a rollback, we are going to make an effort to get every single one of you who voted against a rollback out of office.
Wow. All right. Well, I do want to shift gears and talk about another issue that you've been reporting on, and this has to do with resilience planning in North Beach. And North Beach is a community that's just kind of north of Vilano Beach, which is the next island up from St. Augustine. And there's a new community alliance that has formed in large part around concerns about flooding impacts.
Yeah, and I should say they are new relatively. They've been around for a few years, but this is, if you know anything about the North Beach community neighborhood area, you know that it floods like crazy because we're talking about, absolute barrier along A1A to the Atlantic Ocean right there. So when a storm goes through, this is low-lying, sea level or below areas that get flooded really badly.
And is this sort of an area that's primarily west of A1A, kind of as it reaches the intercoastal? It's almost like a little bowl.
Yep, yeah. There are some houses on the east side of A1A too, but we're talking primarily west, where when the water goes into this bowl and then it sits there. This was an interesting story. I spent months following this just because every single time I thought I had enough on it or I had a good idea of what was going on, something would shift or the legislature would discuss something, and I was like, all right, let me hold off until they finish talking about this. But the long and short of it is that a year ago now, so last summer, Representative John Rutherford, who represents parts of Jacksonville and St. Johns County in D.C. in the House of Representatives, came and went on a little boat tour with a few other local elected officials and toured parts of Vilano and North Beach so that he could see and other elected officials could see the extent of flooding. And this was last summer, so there wasn't even any horrific storm to pin things to. This was still the after effects of storms from a few years prior. And so at that time, during a press conference, he had said, look, I support neighbors' requests for a seawall. We're going to look into funding from FEMA, specifically their Building Resiliency in Communities program, and we're going to try to get this done. So fast forward a year, and discussions about FEMA are a little tricky right now because the Trump administration has kind of gone back and forth on whether they really want to 100% just gut FEMA and give all that money to the states. And the specific program that Rutherford said that he wanted to fund a seawall through, the BRIC program they call it, has been completely eliminated by the federal government. Kristi Noem and that team there in DC have said that it was a wasteful program and it was politicized and it was really focused on giving money before a disaster rather than the way FEMA typically operates, which is funding in the events after a disaster.
And that that fund, as you say, the BRIC funding, the Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities, that was really kind of a, legacy of the Biden administration and the infrastructure plan that he put in place, a lot of which has been or is being rolled back. But at the time, as you say, Congressman Rutherford said, that's what this money should be there for. The BRIC money is there to help communities like this one build, programs. He said, I much prefer building resiliency than after the fact mitigation. And so these walls are hugely expensive.
Yeah, very, very expensive.
I mean, they were saying that, there possibly is a need to bulkhead kind of, the whole area of the intercoastal, but even a mile or a mile and a half, you say, could cost well over $100 million.
Yeah. And that's the kind of thing that I had a conversation with some of the folks at the county in St. John's, and they even said that I believe the word they used was paralyzed until they know what's going on with money from the state and the federal government, because this is the kind of project that kind of price tag, the county government on its own, there is no way they can fund that. They told me that in the event that the feds aren't able to support this, one possible option is to institute a extremely area specific local tax on these people to help them fund it. But that's something that the community would also have to support. And the county folks pointed out to me too, that's something that the entire community might not support, because maybe your house is never flooded. So why the heck should I increase my property taxes to help fund this seawall? So it's all very much in limbo at the moment, which I know is very scary for folks in a neighborhood where one bad hurricane is all it takes and that entire neighborhood is flooded.
Yeah. A lot of damage has been done there too. We've got a call from Brad at the beach. Good morning, Brad. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about the fire department services. They begin to service the construction community at the time the neighborhoods get built. And so they're having to be ready for the houses in the neighborhoods almost before. And then I believe there's a delay in taxing from when it goes from the raw land tax to the person's in their home tax, and they're getting assessed at the full value. So all the services have to be there ahead of that, or at least in a position to respond to it. That's kind of why they need the funding ahead, even with the rapid growth.
That makes sense, Brad. And I mean, of course, there is not just the question of services, but insurance rates go hand in hand with the availability of, for a community's fire response. That is something that's calculated into everybody's insurance rates.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that's something that County Administrator Joy Andrews told me too, is that the county is really going after a lower insurance rate for the entire county and for folks specifically in areas that might not have the closest fire station to them. So it's a case not only of trying to keep up with that growth, but also to then make service even better than it has already been too.
When we talk about resilience, I mean, we were talking about the FEMA funding and the fact that BRIC program has been essentially eliminated, but the state has also been looking at providing some funding. Where does that stand? Because you've also been talking to some state lawmakers about the need that exists in coastal communities like this one in St. John's.
And that's another thing that is kind of just a big question mark at the moment. I had a conversation ahead of the end of the legislative session with Representative Sam Greco, who represents in the State House parts of this area too. And he told me that him and Senator Tom Leek were going after a pretty chunky appropriation from the state's budget in order to get some money over to this area. But he even said at the time that, well, given so much time was spent in the legislature this last legislative session about property taxes and about getting the budget down, that he even said then that this might not end up being a priority for discussion, and it did not end up in the budget. So lawmakers have indicated that they're going to try again this next year, but that's another case of when you don't get it this year, you have to wait another calendar year until the legislature picks back up in session next year.
And you noted these projects take an incredibly long time to complete.
Yes.
And by way of example, you discussed the section of A1A, state of Highway A1A through that area that was destroyed or damaged by Matthew in 2016. It was basically, overwash that took out the road on a section of that highway. And that's a project that was funded by the local government, but also with matches from state and FEMA dollars. And it was a priority because that's a major road and an essential link to communities.
Yeah.
And even that took 7 years.
And I think that's part of why Representative Rutherford made that point a year or so ago now, that it's easier. It's painful no matter which way you cut it. It's painful and it's expensive and it takes time. But if the opportunity is there to build that resiliency ahead of a disaster, you've at least got a leg up after the disaster happens. And that is primarily the way FEMA has always acted. Of, okay, a disaster has happened, now we send in FEMA and we send in the state dollars and the federal dollars. And that's why this BRIC program was kind of definitely a reshaping and a rethinking of how FEMA could operate. And now that it's gone, we're kind of back to, I can't even say the status quo though, since the FEMA could end up getting eliminated, and that would completely change the status quo.
And so what is Congressman Rutherford saying now that that program that he had initially said he would support getting funds from has been eliminated?
I was never able to get a comment from Representative Rutherford about that specifically, unfortunately. His office sent me along a letter that he had sent to the Department of Emergency Management here in Florida back in, I believe, March, about how he, still supported resiliency efforts and wanted to see all of the flooding support brought to these communities. But in terms of specifically FEMA and this program and all these things, I did not get a comment from Rutherford's office.
Okay. We're talking to Noah Hertz about St. Johns County issues, and you're welcome to join our conversation at 904-549-2937. I want to move on to a topic that people like Mark in St. Augustine, who doesn't want anybody from Jacksonville to come on down, will well relate to, and that's the issue of Nights of Lights, because there has been ongoing discussion after what a lot of people described as a disastrous Nights of Lights season in many ways this last year.
Yeah.
And I mean, first of all, remind us what that looked like for people who lived there and people who were visiting.
If you can imagine your car being on the road but not moving for a very long period of time, if you can close your eyes and picture that, that's what Nights of Lights was like this past year. The words gridlock have been used very frequently to describe it, and couple that traffic with the mass amount of pedestrians who were downtown too. And it was just a recipe for disaster. The city was just not expecting that many people to be downtown, as many people as there were. And so we've had ongoing discussions. I think basically every time the St. Augustine City Commission has met since Christmas time, they have brought up Nights of Lights in some way, shape, or form. The latest things they're discussing, and I will say that at the moment, they haven't made a ton of really hard decisions about things. It's been a lot of proposing ordinances and talking about things that might change. One thing that they have fully decided on at this point is they kind of beta tested some potential changes on their July 4th holiday,
Right.
including some traffic barricades that could keep cars from getting near where pedestrians are going to be, and rolling out more public restrooms, so portable public restrooms downtown, because anyone who spends time in downtown St. Augustine knows that there are not a ton of public restrooms. So
Right. And they had a real problem this past year with people just
absolutely.
kind of urinating in public.
Yes, they did. And same,
Nobody's idea of a good time.
nobody's idea of a good time. And similar, they didn't even have trash cans downtown. And so that was just something that they didn't have enough people to get down there and empty the trash cans because they weren't expecting them to fill up that fast. So most recently, they've floated some more things like hiking the price of the parking garage downtown while the city's free shuttle is running, in an effort to drive more people towards the satellite parking lots that are outside the downtown proper, and then encourage people to ride the shuttle. Same with really hiking the cost that people pay if they park illegally and then get a ticket downtown, just because I know there was a situation this past year where people were parking on the green in front of the fort. And that's not somewhere where people are supposed to park, but one person did it, and then a couple more people said, well, surely we can park there. And then now you've got a whole parking lot in front of the Castillo de San Marcos, which is this historic, nationally recognized site that you really should not have cars that close to.
Yeah. And, one thing that I thought was really interesting is, there's the experience that visitors have, and then there's the experience that residents have. And one problem that a lot of people complained about was the fact that this is a service industry town, and the people who work those jobs, who are bringing you your food at your restaurant or waiting on you at the store that you're shopping at, they literally couldn't find a place to park themselves, so they couldn't get to their jobs.
Yeah, so now we're talking about specific parking lots for people who work downtown and this kind of thing, and specific roads for local traffic or that kind of thing. all in service of, I mean, you can imagine how much that's a cascading effect. If someone can't get to their job, then it slows down service at that place. And then if it slows down service, you've got longer lines and more people packed in places. And it's just a domino effect of, if people aren't able to get parking, and Lord knows there is often not enough parking in parts of downtown for the people who want to park there, then it just causes
on a good day.
on a good day, exactly. And parts of Nights of Lights where it just so packed, so much more packed than St. Augustine normally is.
I want to just briefly at least get to a subject that you also covered this last week. The mayor of St. Augustine, who recently took a trip to Israel in June and came back and introduced a resolution for the city commission. Tell us a little bit about what Nancy Sykes-Klein brought back to the commission and kind of what her goal is.
Yeah, last Monday, the city commission, all 4 of the city commissioners who were present at that meeting, passed a resolution supporting the state of Florida's definition of anti-Semitism. So this is a definition that it's often referred to as the International Holocaust Remembrance Association. I believe that's what the A stands for. Alliance. Yeah. There it is. Their definition of anti-Semitism, which is they're a group that has pitched this definition, and that definition has been codified by the state of Florida as theirs. That just outlines what anti-Semitism is, what it looks like, some examples. It has been criticized by groups like the ACLU and Amnesty International, though, for its provisions that talk about Israel, specifically about what critiques of the state of Israel are considered anti-Semitic and which ones are not. Something Nancy said to me when St. Augustine Mayor Nancy Sykes-Klein said to me when the two of us were talking is that they were hoping to show people that that's not what their idea was, because there is a note in the resolution they passed that says that, you can criticize Israel the way you would criticize any other state. But when you start to criticize Israel and say that maybe individual Jews have a dual loyalty to the state of Israel and this kind of thing. Now, there is also a provision in there that says that people are not allowed to compare Israel to the Nazi regime and that kind of thing. So there have definitely been criticisms of that definition of anti-Semitism, but that's part of what Nancy brought back with her from her Israel trip.
And she said she's got a connection. I don't believe she's Jewish, but she has a connection through her stepfather, who was a childhood survivor of the Holocaust. So she said this was very close to her heart. And she didn't necessarily see, kind of Israel's sort of polarizing response to the October 7th attack is necessarily a problem for introducing this resolution.
No, this is something, I mean, even beyond this resolution, which is, it's very much symbolic. It doesn't really change cities' rules. It is just an affirmation of what the state has already said is the law they follow. But she said that this is all part of kind of a greater thing she wants to show of strengthening her relationship, or St. Augustine's relationship, with the state of Israel. She told me that she would even consider making St. Augustine a sister city with a city in Israel. And like you said, that is something I asked her. Like, support for Israel can be polarizing. Like the United Nations, several United Nations bodies have indicated that they are concerned about the potential for genocide being committed in Gaza over this last couple of years of this war in Gaza. And Nancy said that was something, she's interested in hearing other perspectives on.
All right. We did get an email from Ricardo. He says, unfortunately, since the St. Augustine record has all but disappeared, we're lacking local news coverage. Keep an eye on too much development, too much loss of green space, too many petty arguments at the county commission. But he adds, Noah's coverage is great for our county. Thank you.
Oh, that's really sweet. And I will pay attention to the massive amounts of development. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Top of mind for sure.
Well, Noah, it's great to catch up a little bit about St. Johns County news with you. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for having me this morning.
And you can reach Noah Hertz if you have pitches.
It's Noah, Noah, at jackstoday.org.
Noah at jackstoday.org. All right.